this class we're going to be covering two things. This is going to be a hands-on tutorial on handling different layouts and event handling. The first thing that you will need to do is go to Canvas and download the zip file event handling template. That is going to be an exported Android Studio project, which is going to contain this project that we have right now. You will see two files. It's going to be an activity main XML and a main activity.java. The first thing that you may not be familiar with when you look at it is going to be this little guy down here. This is an image button, so it's the same thing as a button, but instead of having text, you're gonna have an image instead. You can determine what image you see by changing this attribute, the source attribute. Right now, we're just using one of the default resources that exist in Android, which is this trash bin. If you want to create your own, you can do that as well by clicking on the plus, adding the different bitmap files or image files that you want to use. But for now, we're just gonna use this one. Other than that, it behaves very similarly to a button. Once you have that, you can just click run and you will be able to see the app on your emulator. Right now, my emulator was already open, so it's gonna be faster. If you're starting the emulator from zero, then it will take a little bit longer. So as you can see, we have just a login screen for a username and password, and we have two buttons. As of right now, we don't have any logic, so the buttons do nothing. The password field, as you can see, is not a password widget, it's just an edit text. We made it like this so we can actually use it to create an event handler that every time you type a letter here, you're going to screen the content and just show asterisks instead. Again, this is not something that you have to do. You could simply just use the password field instead that has baked in that logic already, but we're gonna be doing it from scratch. The first thing that I'm going to show you today is how to create a different layout for the same activity. This may be useful when you're dealing with different screen resolutions or with different conditions that may require you to have less features available, like an offline mode of your application. If there is not a network connection, then you may not want to have the same layout that has all of your online features available. So if you remember, to create an activity, you go to New, create the activity, and just choose the one that you want to create. This will create a Java file and an XML file. Right now, we don't want a new Java file. We just want to have a new XML. So the same brain, different dress. So all you need to do is go over here, right click, create new layout resource. This one, I'm going to call it main linear. This one is going to be a linear layout. These are available qualifiers. These are the things that you can use to decide which layout to use on runtime, either based on the screen width, screen height, resolution, network connection, local, or country code. For now, we don't really care about any of those. We're just gonna be using an empty one. So as you can see, it's empty. Now, to change it so that when you start your app, you render on the screen, the other one, all you have to do is change this line. If you remember, set content view takes as a parameter the value of the layout that you want to render on the screen. So how do we reference it? Well, first, resources.layout. So if you see here, resources, layout, and then the name of the layout that you want. Now this is going to be called main linear. Right now you see that you don't find a resource main linear right now. That's because the R file hasn't been compiled. So when you compile it, it will recognize that this file is now actually a valid layout and it's going to render it properly. So that's just an error that you're gonna get if you haven't compiled the R file. The R file is created automatically by the Android compiler, and as you can see, we have an empty one, which is what we were expecting. Now, we could go ahead and create a new layout from scratch. If you need more practice with creating the layouts, you can. If not, you can simply do what we did on the one from last week, and is copy paste the content from the constraint layout and replace the top element for a linear layout, removing all of the constraints specific parameters, and you will get a linear layout. This one, I've just done that before, so here is what it will result in. I have not added any of the different constraints that you will need to add to make it look similar to this one. So right now, we're just gonna compile the app once again. Every time you change the layout, you have to recompile it. You cannot just apply the changes because you have to render a completely new IDs mapping to the UI. So it's gonna need to be recompiled. So as you can see, we have all of our elements in a linear layout in the right order as we have here. Now, if you need more practice with the layouts, just add the constraints that you need to make this one look as closely as possible to this one, if not the same. You will certainly need to make significant changes. What we have here is just not enough for it. But for the rest of this class, we're gonna be just using the activity linear. As an example, but the logic and everything from the rest of the class is going to be just on the constraint layout that you should already have. So, for today's class, the second part, we're gonna be covering three different things. The thing that we're gonna be covering is just event handling on the UI. So we're gonna be adding logic into our application, and we're gonna be adding logic that responds to button clicks and to entering text on this password. So we're gonna start with the reset button. So the reset button should delete the content on these fields. That is all that it should do. So we're gonna be using the simplest method to do that by creating a method called reset. Reset. Now this needs to be a void method that takes a view as a parameter to be able to be used as a event listener. So what we need to do is first get a reference to the things on our layout. So we want to have a reference to this edit text and a reference to this one. That's why I have meaningful IDs already. So you're gonna create an object of type edit text because that's what our layout is. This is going to be our user field. And all you need to do is call the method find view by ID and then just pass it the ID. You cannot simply say a string with the ID. You have to reference it using the R class. So you say r.id dot user field, which is the ID for this one. Now, do I know this on the top of my head? No, that's why I gave them meaningful IDs. This is going to be the name label text view, so I know it's not this one. Right now, we're just getting a reference to the text, to the edit text for the user. So now we're gonna do the same thing for the password. Password field, but instead of saying give me the view with ID user field, we just want the one with the ID password field. Now we can use these variable objects to modify or interact with our UI. So what does the user field should be? Well, if we have something, we just need to make sure that you have nothing. So set the text to empty, and the same thing for the password field. All that we're saying is put inside of these views this text, which is an empty string. So we're gonna be doing one more thing, and is that right now we're gonna be running it. So we have the logic, we have a reset method that takes these two IDs, references the corresponding widgets in the UI, and then just sets the text to null, to an empty string, not null. Null will be a null pointer in Java. So let's type something, and then delete. Wait, doesn't work. Any ideas why it doesn't work? Okay, so if you didn't answer the question, you should totally try to answer the questions when I make them. Just pause the video, think to yourself, why isn't it working? Let's start. So we have a method to reset. This is called the reset button. And we have that you're setting the text of these two things to empty. However, just because you call this method reset doesn't mean that it's linked to the reset button. Naming doesn't really work that way. So the other reason is that for a method to be able to be used as an event listener, it has to be a public void method that takes as a parameter a view. If it is not explicitly made public, just because the way Java works is that by default things are private. And if it's private, it will not be able to be used as an event listener. So what we need to do in this case is go to our button and register the method that we want to call whenever this button is clicked. For that, we change the onClick attribute here, and we just choose the method that we want to call. So what we're saying is, every time there's a click on this button, execute this method. If we don't have a public method, then it's not going to be listed here, because it's not going to be recognized. And if we run it, then it will throw us an error saying, there is no method called reset that is public, so I cannot execute this. Let's run it once again. Feel free to pause the video whenever you're working on it, and then wait, run it, do it on your own, look at what it looks like on yours, and then see if it looks like the one I'm showing here. So in this case, let's type something, and do reset. See? If we type something just on this one, oops, I clicked something there, and then there, the keyboard. So that functionality is done. Every time we click this button, these two will be deleted. And this is all the code it took to do it. Now we're gonna go into step number 2. Step number 2 is that every time we click the submit button, we should be saving or comparing this login information to a backend that tells us, oh, this username and password are a valid combination. Right now, we don't know how to do that. So all that we're gonna do is make sure that you can read information from these fields. So what we're gonna do is create a different event listener for this one. However, we are not going to be using the same method that we did here. We're gonna be using the anonymous event listener method. Or, well, it's not a method, it's just the way that you implement it. So, the first thing that we need to do is create an onClick listener variable. So, what we're gonna be doing is saying that we're gonna have a private on-click listener, and this is going to be a new on-click listener. Now we need to give it a name, so let's just call this the submit listener. Submit listener, new on-click listener. Now, when we're creating a new on-click listener, we have to actually override a method called onClick. So we could simply go from the get-go. Here we're going to be doing it like this. Oh. So when you're dealing with a onClick listener, what you need to remember is that you need to make it so you have an object or an instance or a new class of a click listener that uses onClick method. So we're gonna be doing here onClick, and we're just gonna be writing this method. This is very similar to the one we had before, and it's gonna take in a view. Okay, I'm missing something. Listen. Oh, I was missing the override part. Okay, so we're overriding the onClick listener method called onClick. Inside of here is where we're gonna have the logic for your listener. So what you're gonna need to do is basically a similar thing to what we did before. So we're gonna just create a toast here, which is gonna print the message in this case. So it's gonna be toast dot make text here. This is going to be the message. I always like to have my message in a independent variable rather than have it hard-coded there. So message is going to be user plus username plus has been created. So this message is going to be a string, this is going to be a variable, and username is a value that we have to get from our UI. So if you remember, all that we have to do to access the user field is first create a reference to it using the find by ID, and then we can say that the string username is going to be the value stored on the user field. So it's called user field, and instead of set text, we're just gonna get the text. Now instead of a string, this is going to give us an editable text, which is going to have some formatting information inside of it. So to get just a string value, that is all we need, you use the toString method. Now if you notice here, we still have an error. The error here is because this refers to the context in which the text is going to be displayed. Think of it of in which screen do I have to render this on top of. This, when we use it like this, and I know I'm using this a lot, when we use the keyword this inside of the onCreate method, for instance, what we're basically saying is render the toast in the class that I am right now. And the class that you're right now is an activity, so you can just render it in the activity. When you're doing it inside of the view onClick listener, remember this is an anonymous class. So the keyword this refers to the instance of the onClick listener, not to the activity. And that is not a renderable context, so you're going to get an error because of that. So what we have to do is say explicitly, look for the instance of the main activity, and in there is where you're going to be rendering the message with this line. Now this is the part that is going to give you the most headaches in the class when you're doing it. And is that you make the text and then the toast and it doesn't show you any errors, but when you compile it, you will notice something. So try running it right now. And let's see what happens. Let's wait for a minute later. Okay. So username and submit. So it doesn't work just yet. So right now it doesn't work for two reasons. Reason number one, we haven't told our code that this listener has to be run whenever the submit button is pressed. And we cannot do it on the XML. That's the whole point of having an anonymous class, is to do it in the code only. So what you're gonna do is get an instance of your button inside here. It's going to be the submit button, button, find view by ID, r.id dot, and it's going to be submit button. And then you call set on click listener, and in here you say that you want to register the listener that we determined up here. So every time the submit button is clicked on, you're gonna run this code. The last thing is that if you don't have show here, the method is gonna be called, but you're not gonna be seeing the toast on the screen. So just remember to always put show at the very end. So if we run it once again in your emulator, this will restart the app. Again, mine is a little bit faster sometimes, a little bit slower sometimes. So if it takes a little bit longer in your case, just pause the video until yours has worked. So let's do this. So submit. User cell has been created. Now just a little thing here with the spacing, the formatting, but now we are able to read data from that button. There is the advantage of onClick listener using it like this, and is that your logic is private to the class. It is not exposed to another class. Whereas using this kind of method means that you have to make it public. So anyone outside of the class will have access to this method and could potentially call it. And if you're in a different activity, you could end up trying to call this method, which doesn't have a rendering for this particular ID. So you will get a null pointer exception and your activity and your app as a whole will crash. So this anonymous onClick listener tends to be a little bit safer, but they both work the same way. This one also has the advantage that to change the method, let's say that your functionality, you changed it and you have two different types of resets, you could simply change the name of this method to be something else without having to change anything here. No, you will have to go here, change the method that is being called on the onClick attribute, otherwise it will not work. Here, onClick. With this one, you don't have that problem because you will not have to change any method namings or whatever. The logic will still be inside of here. One more thing that I want you to notice is that right now we are calling this over and over again to instantiate or get a reference to those variables. If that is the case, I would recommend you to take them out. You will instance or declare the variables outside here, and then initialize them in your own create method. Now the only problem with this one is that if you try to just assign the value at the very top like this, you will find that you're gonna get an error, because the way this works is that find by ID will try to get a pointer or a reference to the currently displayed widget in your UI. Now, when you're compiling the class for your app, it's gonna be okay. Let's create this one. Let's go to the UI that is rendered and get the user field ID. But that doesn't happen until you call this method. And this method is not called before you initialize the variables on your class. So you will get a null pointer exception. So here you cannot initialize it. You need to initialize it after you have made your content view. But when you have this one, then you will reduce duplicated code a little bit and make your code just a little bit less bloated. If it is the case that you only use it inside of this method but nowhere else, then this is the ideal. If you're unsecure whether to make it public and private, remember, if you don't put anything, it's going to be private, but you can explicitly say private. That way no one outside of the class has access to these variables representing or linking you to the UI. We're gonna do the same thing with the second one, which is the password field. And then we're gonna move ahead and go and work on the second part of the tutorial, or the third part, which is going to be a different type of event listener. Okay, so thus far we work on event listeners for the buttons. Now we're gonna work on an event listener for the text on this little edit text. So remember, what we want to do is that every time we type something here, we don't see the password because that's not very secure. So we want to make it so we see just a screening of the password or just a bunch of asterisks. Now this one, we're gonna do the same thing that we did here. So first, let's create a variable. Oh no, we already have it, so we don't need it. Perfect. So we have the password field. So what we're gonna do is say password field, and we're gonna do a new listener. Now in this case, we don't use the onClick listener because every time you type a new letter inside of the box, it's not a click. So when you do that, you're gonna have to call a different type of listener, and you register it with a method called add on text change listener. Perfect. Now if you notice here, we need a text watcher variable, which is going to be very similar to our onClick listener. It's just called different, but it's the same idea. We create a private text watcher. Let's call it the password listener. It's going to be a new one. Text watcher. And this one will have three methods that you have to override: before text changed, on text changed, or after text changed. Whenever you're doing an anonymous class, just make sure that you put a semicolon at the end of the class definition, like this. Android Studio tends to ignore it, but it is going to give you an error if you don't. And then we're gonna pass this variable as the parameter for the text change listener. We're only be working with the on text change today, but the before text change and after text change could be used as well. They are generally used for more of a formatting of the information in there, but today we're just gonna talk at the on text changed. So every time we make a change to the text, like typing a new letter, then this method is gonna be called. And inside of here, we want to do two things. Number one, replace the letters by asterisks, right? So how do we do that? We use the same thing that we did here. Remember when we did the get text and the set text? We're gonna be doing the same thing. So first thing we need to do is get the text. So let's look at the current value, which is going to be the password field, get text to string. Literally that's going to be the current value. Now I like to write this as a different method, so I'm going to do it in an external method, which is going to be a screen password. We take the string, and then we return the screen string. Return the screen. And then here what we're gonna be saying is that you're gonna say that password field dot set text to be the screened one. So string screened is going to be screen password when we pass the current value. Okay. So in this method, we want to do two things. Number one, make sure that the thing is not empty, because if it's empty, then we're gonna have an issue. There is one way to do it if you're not familiar with Java that is very similar to C++. You can just say if current dot length equals 0. So if our current string has a length of 0, it means it's empty. Now there is another way, if you're more familiar with Java, let's just call the isEmpty. So if it's empty, now we want to run this code if it's not empty. So what we're gonna be saying is that for integer I equals 0, I less than the length a step of 1, we're gonna be adding a new asterisk to our screen string. So if our current password is of length 5, then we add 5 asterisks. If it is 4, then we add 4. If it's 3, we add 3. We could simplify the expression as Andrej tells us. Again, if you're very familiar with Boolean expressions, then you can just use not to make it a false statement. I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay. Now, remember the last part that we had here was registering it, so that's fine. The only problem is that every time that you call set text, like we're doing here, this method is going to be called because the text has changed. So if we leave it like this, we will enter an infinite loop and our app will not work. Just try it out, run your application, and try to edit the password. So username works fine, but password, right now I've been typing and my app has crashed because we've entered the dreaded infinite loop. So, again, every time you call set text, you're triggering this event. So you're here in an infinite loop, just setting the text over and over and again. So what we're gonna be doing is taking advantage of the fact that our listener is registered dynamically here. So what you need to do is go up here, remove the listener. So what you're doing is unregister the listener, update the content, and then register the listener once again. By doing so, you basically break that infinite loop. You're basically doing is, okay, stop listening to the changes for now, then put new content, the text has changed, and then register the listener so that the next time the user types something, you will actually see it. Perfect. Now, what happened to the password? Well, right now we don't know what the password is because we're just literally replacing the content by a little set of asterisks, but we're never saving the actual password. So that's what we need to do here. So that's actually the thing that we need to do. So what we're gonna be doing is doing that in here as well. So step number one is save the actual password. There is a few ways you can go about it. If you want to think about it, try to implement it, that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna go with the simplest option, and it's actually the one I like the most. So you create a private variable, it's going to be a string for our password, and let's just call it true password. And then we're going to be using this variable to store our password. So every time that we get here, we have a new string. So let's assume that you have only an empty string. So the first time you enter, you only have one letter. So all you have to do is add that letter to our current password. So it's gonna be true password, and we're going to concatenate the letter of our current password that is being passed on to us. So last letter. Now why do we want the last letter? Because the other letters will have already been saved by that point. Current dot char at, and then we're gonna get the character at the last position. And if you remember indexing, that means we're gonna be getting the character at the last value. Now this is going to return a character, this is a string, so we need to do some casting. So we're gonna be using character.toString. If you're not familiar with Java, this may surprise you a little bit, but we cannot cast directly a character to a string, so we use the character class and the toString method to make the conversion. So here we're taking the character at the last position of our current password and putting it into this string. And then we're just going to concatenate it to our true password as far. So the first time we type a letter, it's gonna be put here. Then it's gonna be replaced by one asterisk. Then the second time we just take, there will be an asterisk there, and we can just read it and keep going through that step. So let's run the app and we'll see what happens now. Oh wait, there is one thing that I need to do so I can show you. So we're gonna modify this one. Instead of username, we're just gonna be calling the password. So we're gonna be showing the true password. So when we click the submit button, we're gonna see what value we saved and the password. Okay. So password, let's start typing. 1, 2, HJUIO. That is what I typed. So let's submit. Oh, my password is H and a bunch of asterisks. So if you notice what's happening here is that whenever we changed it, the cursor goes to the very back, right? So what we want to do is make sure that whenever we type, the cursor goes to the far right. Right now it's staying on the far left. So when we type a new letter, the letter is typed on the left. So we're taking, after the first time, we're taking is the asterisk as the last character. So what we do is that after set text change, we go to password field dot set selection, and set selection will tell us where to put the caret inside of this one. So we want to make it so it is at the last place of its content. We could use the true password if we wanted to, but I prefer to use the content that it has at the time. So we're gonna be using password field dot get text dot to string dot length. That way we ensure that the selection is based on the current content, even though just saying true password dot length should give us the same result. And in this case it would. So let's try once again. So password, let's do EDC. Click on submit. So now we're saving the right password. So that's everything that we had to do. We have 3 different event handlers. One for the password here. FET. One to reset it, and then submit and reset. Now, what happens if I click submit once again? See that the password is still there? Because we are not using the content here to print it. We are using the variable that we're using to store the true password. So we're gonna make a little change on the delete, in which we say, okay, so since we're deleting that, then the true password is also going to be deleted. Run it one again. Let's wait for the app to start. Says install successful. I'm gonna try again. Okay, perfect. Sometimes that happens that the app doesn't actually start. So let's do this one. Submit, EDCB, reset, and submit, nothing there. So there is just one thing that if you want to practice a little bit more on this, right now the password only works if we add stuff. If we delete, it will not work as nicely. So this is what I typed. Now let's try deleting 2 of them. See, we are adding the asterisks because our code is not handling that. So if you want to practice more just on your Java programming. Then you can practice on modifying the screen pass to account for this and save the password and make those changes as well. Okay, that is everything for you today. I hope you learned a little bit of that and try to play around with those. You can simply create more buttons to add more functionality if you want, but that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.